Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Human Risk podcast. If you're one of the many new subscribers to the show, then welcome. And if you're a long-established listener, welcome back. As we continue to adapt to life under coronavirus, I thought it'd be a good idea to speak to an expert about some of the behavioural challenges it poses. So I reached out to Niels van Quaquebeke, who's a professor of leadership and organisational behaviour at the Kuhne Logistics University in Hamburg. I first met Niels when he taught me on a course a few years ago. He was hugely impressive, and I've stayed in contact with him ever since. So I was delighted when he agreed to come onto the podcast. I should also add a very warm welcome to any of my former colleagues who were on that course with me. As you'll hear, Niels is great company and extremely insightful. We discuss some of the human dynamics the virus is bringing out and explore what it means for leaders, within companies and nationally. We also look at things from an individual perspective, and Niels shares his thoughts on how we can all adjust to the new environment. He's got some really interesting, very practical ideas, which I think you'll find useful and make you think differently about the world. It's not just an interesting conversation. It was a real pleasure to record. So Niels, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Look, I want to start before we tackle the bigger topics. You posted something I thought was really kind of insightful and very simple on LinkedIn, which was that you described coronavirus is to elderly people what climate change is to younger people. And I just thought that was a really interesting encapsulation of the challenges we're facing. And I just wanted to explore that with you a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was all born out of a frustration that, you know, in some circles of younger people that I'm part of as part of my sports teams, people actually didn't seem to care too much about self-isolation and were posting all these messages like we're safe, it doesn't matter, and so on. So let's just do this and go outside and play basketball. And I got really frustrated. And then I thought, yeah, that's the same as almost the attitude of some of the elderly people for climate change. Like, it doesn't affect us. So we don't invest ourselves much because there's huge inconvenience for us. So let's not care about it. And I think what this time now shows is actually we have multiple issues that we need to work together on as a society. And I think it's nice to put that mirror in front of people and saying, here, it's just the same thing. If you care about climate change, that's your future. But there are other people that also still want to live right now. And by you going out and being infected and ultimately spreading the virus more, you're doing them a disfavor. So let's rather work together. Maybe that's going to be the silver lining coming out of all of this, that we start to realize that we have to work more together. That's actually what society is about.
Right. And I just thought it was a lovely kind of piece because it's a total step away from the individualistic approach. So, you know, particularly coming out of the 1980s, but I think beyond then, there has been quite a lot of selfish tendencies. We can see that in some very high profile people in certain roles across the globe who, you know, are very self-minded. I was going to say self-aware, but they're not self-aware, but very self-minded.
No.
And I think that's an interesting societal observation.
Yeah. Although I think the verdict is still out how this is going to develop. I think it brings out the worst in us and the best in us as humankind. We see some really bad stories. There is a lot of xenophobia now surfacing in different levels or in different areas. We also see the European Union, the first response was by all states to lift the borders again and establish them. So Schengen is no more. Then even within countries like Germany, even the federal state suddenly imposed travel restrictions on fellow Germans. So we have a lot of that, and the xenophobia popped up. So if you then drive around with your license plate in a different state where you're not supposed to be, you know, you get shouted at. And it's weird how quickly that was able to change. Yet at the same time, we also hear or at least I hear all these lovely stories of people going shopping for other people and making sure that the kids are being taken care of, or generally looking out for each other. So I think this crisis exacerbates everything. Everything becomes more pronounced. And so all the kindness now becomes more pronounced and visible, but also some of the darker tendencies that are also part of our human nature.
That's really interesting. And the other thing, and this may just be a UK issue, but there's a lot of kind of war language being used which I think, again, plays into the same dynamic, which is so you get the good side of it. Everybody clubs together and you've got factories that are now producing useful things to fight the virus who previously were producing car parts or something else. So you've got that kind of collective national effort. On the other hand, you've got this kind of language of fighting and isolation. And, there's a horrible narrative around we're fighting the disease. So people in hospital are fighting it. And which sort of implies if you succumb, you're weak. And I think there's this strange sort of, dynamic.
Yeah, I'm not that happy with that rhetoric. I think it feeds into the wrong schema. Fighting is good if you know what you're fighting, if you see something, if you have a clear enemy. And yeah, in many ways the virus is an enemy of us, but we can't just put it in there or put it out there and touch it and see it. So we then assume proxies for that virus. And so sometimes these would be the Chinese coming to our country, or for Trump, it's every other nation coming to the US. And so it becomes a fighting within us because we don't have the virus as a clear object that we can touch and see. And so I'm not happy with that rhetoric. I don't think it's good. It's very helpful. And I think it puts additional pressure also to those working at the front line. But you can compare it with messages from other leaders around the world. So if you look at German Chancellor Angela Merkel or Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand or some of the Scandinavian countries, their messages were a lot different. It was an appeal to rationality and compassion and being understanding with oneself and with others. And that's really what it's all about. So also just last week, the German president, Steinmeier, he gave an address where he said it's a test of our humanity, the values that we want to stand for. And I think that's a better rhetoric. You want to bring out the best right now in people. It's not the fighting. You don't need to rally the people to any cause. You need to bring out the best in people, our moral fundament, the spirit of community and caring. And a war rhetoric doesn't do it, but it appeal to our humanity and showing who we can be. That can bring it out. So yeah, as always, leadership is a difficult thing, and the rhetoric that goes with it is colored depending on the personal agendas of certain leaders in the world.
And look, I've seen a number of articles that have suggested that the countries that are handling this best and with the most compassion and empathy are led by women. And obviously the opposite must be true. Do you think there's something in that, or is that just sort of survivorship bias allowing us to come to that conclusion?
Yeah, it's hard to say what's chicken and what's egg there, right? So these nations are often more egalitarian, often more science-driven than other countries. So it also allowed these nations to maybe put these types of representatives in office, so females in office, that wouldn't have happened in other countries. I'm not necessarily sure whether their leadership style in the end is better or worse. We don't, at least if we look into organizational leadership, we don't see much of a difference between female and male effectiveness as leaders. They have slightly different styles, but only slightly. They're minuscule, really, if you think about it. We can only tease them out with statistical measures over bigger populations. But yeah, some nations, and I think the discourse of those nations over the past decade has allowed certain leaders to be elected, and that's good. I look at Germany. I mean, she's a physics, or she used to be a physics scientist, chemical physics, I think. And that's quite nice to be led by somebody like this right now, because this is it's time where you want science to reign supreme. Angela Merkel has been in office for a long time, but many people have called her dull or boring and not rallying, not charismatic, and that's all true. She's not that. She's a different type of leadership. She represents a different type of leadership. She listens to people, she moderates, she facilitates, and then tries to combine that into a sound decision. And right now, that's good. At other times, maybe you need the types of Macrons and Boris Johnsons and Trumps that have certainly more flamboyance about them and have more of that charisma. But right now, I'm just happy to live in this country.
Yeah, look, I think I would prefer a scientist leading my country than potentially someone that was a journalist that has an interesting relationship with the truth, shall we say.
Yeah.
But I mean, and looking at sort of organizational leadership in this kind of situation, it must be quite interesting because on the one hand, everybody's talking about this was unpredictable. And on the other hand, it's entirely predictable. And we've had Bill Gates and people like that. And the World Health Organization, Trump's favorite thing, talking about this, the risk that this poses. So people should have been ready and should have known. On the other hand, you can always argue the manifestation of it is always potentially unexpected and unusual. So how do we see that in sort of terms of sort of leadership challenges that poses?
Well, I mean, on a strategic level, which is not necessarily what I call leadership, because when I talk about leadership, it's about people, but other people refer to leadership also on a strategic level. And let's just quickly touch upon that so we can then leave it aside. It's the issue of resilience. And I think what we've seen over the past is that there is always a call towards resilience and making your systems, your supply chains more resilient, or your finances more sustainable, and so on. The truth of the matter, though, is that over the last decades, everything has become more competitive. So you try to squeeze every profit you can out of your operations, and resilience doesn't create profit. Resilience is slack that you need to have in the system, and it's precaution. It's something it's a luxury that you keep for yourself. And so, yeah, many people have opted. I mean, you've witnessed this firsthand as you worked in a bank. Many people have opted for clear-cut profits and maximize them, even to ridiculous profit rates that don't seem realistic at all anymore. And it was that and nothing. So you would say that this could be a wake-up call. But we just had a large discussion within our faculty at the KLU from different perspectives: the finance people, the accounting people, the supply chain people, and me from the behavioral side. We all pitched it. And we're all skeptical that this will lead anywhere, that this will come with change. I think it's part of human nature that our human processing is very short-term oriented. Then the shareholder systems that we currently have in place also don't endorse a longer-term perspective necessarily. And we have governments that are competing against each other, and they often do so by lifting certain regulations on companies that really should have been in place for safekeeping. Now we see additional weakening of institutional or international institutions, which we should have, and the US is blazing the trail in that regard. So if something else is going to hit us with the economy, we're going to be even worse positioned. So I'm skeptical that we're going to learn anything out of this. I think generally it's clear. But so is it for you as a private person, all right? Even as a private person, you know that there are going to be bad times. And yet what we've seen over the last decade is that people have gone into debt, financing their houses, often really up to the maximum they can afford, maybe a little bit above, saying, okay, I make good money right now. The credit conditions are really good, so I'm just going to go all in, and I'm going to get the biggest mansion that I can possibly afford, and predicting that everything is going to go as linearly as it has. And now look at those people. Lots of them are going to be screwed as well, and it's not because they were stupid. It's simply it wasn't part of their thinking. We don't have these catastrophes on our minds. So if you want to blame corporations and governments, you should also start with yourself. Why didn't you anticipate more that something like this could happen, so you don't walk into this amount of financing that will kill you now in the next months if you run out of a job or you have to sacrifice some salary? The bias behind this, and I mean, you at your Human Risk Project are a lot about bias. It's this optimism bias. We have an unrealistic optimism, and that's a bias, which is good for us generally because it keeps us healthy in a good mood. We're not doomsday sayers and so on. It keeps us, as long as we're optimistic, we can keep agency. We feel like we can do something. The locus of control is with us. We feel we're the master of our fate. As soon as we realize we're not that much master of our own fate, and things can go south really quickly. that's when we lose our sense of agency, and then we draw back within ourselves. We get defensive, and we don't do as many good and productive things. But for us as a species, it's good for us to reproduce, even though there may be an uncertain future. It's good for us to explore and so on. So it's evolutionary. It makes sense to have this optimism, even though realistically and statistically, we should prepare for something else. So all in all, yeah, what are the consequences? I think on a strategic level, we're not going to see much change. As was with all these big crises, I think afterwards we're going to see some sort of regulation happening on a macro level. Although that's going to be harder than ever now that the US is not leading the world anymore. Something like Bretton Woods after the Second World War, which was a financial reconstruction, is unlikely to happen today because we don't have a leader of the world. I'm not even saying free world. We don't have a leader anymore. And so that's going to be interesting how that's going to be structured on a macro level and the consequences on the meso level as well. On a micro level, I think we're going to see a lot of tragic stories for individuals that have also had this optimism bias. And on the one hand, and then I shut up. On the one hand, I think this is going to be tragic. But then on the other hand, that's also part of the human endeavor. It's ultimately people who've accumulated risk. And by, for instance, going hugely into debt for certain things, it's the same for businesses. You have people that get a lot of profit, or businesses that get a lot of profit because they take on a lot more risk than other people. And so their payout in good times is a lot higher. And now I'm beginning to be a little bit surprised that those same people that always said, well, I have a bigger payout because I accumulate more risk, are now among the first to actually say, hold on, I have so much risk on my books, I need to be bailed out. Right? So they want the profit, they want the positive out of the game. They want, for the risk, they want the gains, but they want to hedge their risk right now and say, somebody else pays for this. So I think as a society, we need to find a way how to answer that, whether that's redistribution of wealth, or whether that's capping certain payouts to managers and so on. I think there needs to be a discussion. And luckily in some parts of the community, that's happening. But how soon that's going to be reality, I don't know.
And that's an interesting take, because if you sort of, and maybe it's because I'm looking for this and I'm conscious of that as well, but you're painting a picture that we're going to go back to the way we were before. And I kind of approached this and said, I think things are going to change. So for example, lots of leaders don't like people working from home because they can't control them. And yet they're having to let things happen now that they wouldn't let happen. And it's kind of demonstrating that many things can happen in different ways. And so my presumption was that would feed through into different ways of working, different ways of thinking about things. And what the picture you paint from you and your colleagues' discussion is that we tend not to learn from these things. And as I reflect on that, I think back to the 2008 crisis and say, well, what has the banking industry learned? Answer, not much.
You pointed to something interesting, the financial crisis. I mean, that was close to a global financial meltdown. And we did have... And by the way, for the audience, this is also how Christian and I get to know each other, because that was the time when we started working with each other. So, yeah, you saw then that a lot of regulations happened and institutions tried to then play to those regulations. But what you've seen over the last 7 years or so is that these been slowly but surely eroded. The rules are being softened, and banks are playing some of those games which they initially realized are not healthy for them because they get them into deep trouble. So, and you can see this with different crises. We always learn a little bit, but it's often not sustainable because ultimately we succumb to competition. And in competition, you succeed sometimes if you take shortcuts, make it easier for yourself and others. So that's going to be, as long as we don't have a global government and global regulations, that's unfortunately the dynamic we're going to find ourselves in. And in the foreseeable time, I don't see the world pulling together under one sort of leadership, or at least at one table, given that all the institutions are being weakened right now. But you have a point that right now it's an experiment for everybody. And the first thing to accept or allow certain things is to see that they could actually work out in practice. So like home office, for instance. But what happens is quite interesting right now. I don't think that you get managers that suddenly say, oh, yeah, this is really possible with home office. It's not a problem. But rather, as I was saying at the beginning of our little conversation here, it exacerbates what's already within. So the manager who trusts people that person is now going to see, oh, look, they can work from home and they can coordinate, and I support it a little bit and so on, and it all works out. Given the circumstances, it's actually pretty good. The manager who has a deep feeling of mistrust and feels people need to be controlled or incentivized in order to work, they're going to relay different messages to their people. They're the first ones up. I mean, the software that's skyrocketing right now is spyware software for computers, because it's those managers that now require of their employees to install that software. And that software then has attention checkers, like, are you actually at the computer? Are you looking? Zoom also had this. They have disabled this attention checker to see whether the Zoom screen is on top. It has keyboard stroke measurements. So how often are you actually working on the keyboard? What websites are you surfing on, and so on. So that software domain is also seeing quite a peak right now in demand. And that's fueled by those managers who now fear they're losing control. So it's not that you see everybody's agreeing that this is this great new world that is possible, but everybody's now thrown back on what they actually believe about humans, about employees, and then they try to work with that world. And some do it in a very dysfunctional way, and some in a more functional way. Great anecdote. I guess this is just my world for university presidents. So, University of Hamburg president, he wrote around in the first week of self-isolation, he wrote around an email saying, "Dear employees, as we move into self-isolation, please be aware that even if you're in a home office, it's work. As such, as an employee of the state, you need to be available for calls or other coordination within the allotted time of work. If you cannot be reached in that time, it equates to an absence from your workplace, and it will come with the same consequences as it would have in our usual office environment." That was his message in the first week of the self-isolation. Yeah, and it says a lot about his thinking of who his employees are and whether they work or not. And then contrast that with a vice chancellor of the University of Exeter, which I'm also affiliated with. He was saying, these are trying times for all of us, certainly for me and my family. I understand that right now for each and one of us, your personal safety and those that you love comes first. And so I hope that you can make arrangements for that, and please take your time. And for work, I understand that we're all trying the best that we can right now. I have absolute confidence that you will try to do the best that you can right now, and rest assured that I will do the best that I can as well. It's not all going to be optimal. We're all going to still have to find our path. But in the end, I think if we all pull together, we can actually pull through this and grow together as a community. Contrast the two statements. They say a lot more about the person sending the statement than the pace that the statement actually says. And what does it then do to the employees? Well, the one are going to feel controlled, and they're only going to do 9 to 5 business, and they're definitely not going to walk the extra mile, and they're just going to blame it on the technology if something doesn't work. They're like, okay, I'm not connected to the internet, I don't have to work. The other people, they're going to see, okay, I'm not connected to the internet, but I want to contribute, so I'm going to tether my laptop to my mobile phone, and I'm just going to work from that internet connection. And so they're going to be more proactive. So you still have both types of managers, and both now find themselves challenged. But I think the trusting one is now finding that his or her leadership style works a lot better in this type of climate. That's the one thing. And then the other thing is it exacerbates, so it doesn't only exacerbate what's within you as a leader, so whether you trust or do not trust, but it also exacerbates the need for leadership. Because leadership is ultimately about guidance and support. And so some of these needs for guidance and support are thwarted right now for people working at home. Psychologically speaking, we have 3 basic psychological needs. So one is for relatedness. We want to feel like we belong to a social group. So that's thwarted right now in our self-isolation. And then the second need is competence. We want to feel like we're useful, like we're effective in something. It's also pretty hard, not only at work, but also all our hobbies suddenly are stopped. So we can't get better in basketball or hip hop dancing or guitar that we play in a band outside. That is all stopped. And the last one is autonomy, right? We want to feel like we're in control, master of our own fate. And Yeah, that's definitely hit a hard stop right now. So these are psychological needs that you need to fulfill in order to stay sane and be productive. So part of leadership is not only to provide guidance and structure for work. This is how we work. These are the communication processes and so on. But it's also supporting these psychological needs in humans, in the employees that one has. And one can do this quite nicely, but there you see leaders differentiating themselves, those that actually care about humans and have that on their radar, how they support these needs for their employees. And then you have those leaders that actually never construed leadership as being about people. They always construed it as being about numbers and processes. And you find with them that they don't care about those employee needs, and they will see not only in the crisis that people are going to break down or not going to be great workers, but after this crisis, once things have calmed down and the employment market picks up again, people are going to have a hard look at themselves and their situation and organizations and ask themselves, is this really the company where I want to work?
And that's fascinating in the knowledge economy, right? Because productivity levels, if the sorts of tasks that we need people to do require them to be human, because otherwise you give it to a machine. And so those skills of creativity and critical thinking, there's a whole load of things that machines struggle with doing. You need people to be on their best human form to be able to deliver that. And so there's so implicit in what you're saying there is there's a huge amount of value destruction in terms of sort of what you might term old school command and control managers.
Yeah. And I think this time will show it more than any other time. Question is whether we're going to be honest with ourselves afterwards and weed out a little bit the leadership ranks for those that actually provide value, sustainable value that we need in the future that we're walking into as a service and knowledge and creative economy, versus those that could really be taken over by some sort of bot. Most managerial task, if it's just monitoring and some guidance, that can actually be done by a bot. And some of the research we're conducting and other people in the world is actually investigating this, how the part of leadership that's more about management can actually be substituted by bots. Because humans actually don't mind being led by algorithms. You have your little smartwatch and it says close your ring, so you get up a couple more times or you run a few more steps. So we respond to these gamified type of algorithms. We like it when we have indications on our Facebook page or Instagram. We like it when we're pinged and we see the little hearts going up and so on. So this could all be done by machines, and often without little loss. In fact, as we say in our teaching, often when it comes to executive teaching, it's not about making you into great leaders. That's not where the biggest effect is, the biggest net effect for the industry. The biggest net effect for the industry is making sure that shitty leaders become okay leaders, because that's where people suffer. That's really where people suffer. It's the shitty leaders, and we still have too many of them. So if you substitute just the shitty leaders through bots and that perform on like an average level, they don't need to be outrageously good. They just need to do a decent and fair job. And I think we trust algorithms a lot more with some fairness than we do trust that in humans. Then we actually have the humans that are still in managerial ranks, and they can focus on leadership, what we actually consider leadership. And these are the creative tasks, the caring, inspirational things that people need.
That's fascinating. And one of the other dynamics I've observed, which sort of I find really intriguing, is you've got these managers that are of that command and control structure, but they kind of know that they need to be seen to do the right thing. So you've got the ones that clearly can't even don't engage with the topic at all, who and your example of the we've got the Stasi on top of you every moment of your day, and you will behave in this way. And that, by the way, wasn't just academia. The Wall Street Journal did the same thing. Interestingly, to its journalists, which I thought was bizarre for a world where you do want them scurrying off and doing investigations and kind of thinking about things, and not just sitting behind their keyboard. And so you've got those, but you've also got people sit in the middle who are not capable of doing the empathetic leadership, but they sort of still feel like they need to. So you end up with very strange dynamics, and I've seen a few of these where you get people recording a video in the office, telling people to work from home, and sort of then having to deal with the cognitive dissonance of, I know I'm filmed in the office and there's probably a camera crew there as well, making it even worse. So I'm going to have to find some sort of mental gymnastics to explain this. So you say something like, we all need to work from home. Some of us will need to work in the office, and you create a reason why you as a senior leader need to be in the office to justify it. So they fail completely. They tick the box in terms of, I have done a video to tell people to work from home, but they fail completely on the empathetic level. And what I find intriguing is that they see it as another box ticking exercise. It doesn't occur to them to go, how do I make this feel authentic? And an answer might be, the best way to encourage people to work from home is to do a crappy video on your smartphone from home, talking about the challenges of working from home, maybe with a baby on your lap and a dog barking, and just demonstrate to people that you're human. And they don't do that, yet they know they need to do something. And I find that contradiction really interesting.
Yeah, fully agree. I would qualify though, and that some of them, what you call those in the middle, some of it do it as a box ticking exercise, so that really backfires. And some of them, they have their heart in the right place, just don't know how to do it, and because everything is so new to them, so they have their traditional ways, and they don't have the creativity to think outside of the box. I think the latter are actually great to have, because we say A for effort, but I actually think if you make an effort, that's good. That is a sign that you care. And I think you sometimes get it also, the message that somebody is really trying right now. And as often, you will also have this in your circle of friends. Some are great communicators, some are not. But if you're in a bad place, and even the bad communicators, if they speak from the heart, even if it's not great, right, what they say and professionally competent, you feel they're making an effort, and it makes you feel better. So I wouldn't discourage anybody from trying. I would always say try and then learn. Have people around you to tell you, give you feedback of what you could improve, and be open and humble in your approach to the situation. Those that just want to check boxes, I think ultimately, I hope this leads to a weeding out process, that those false impression management people will actually be identified as not caring actually about people. And if you don't care about people, I think you're wrong in a leadership position where you have responsibility for people. You can then let them have some sort of job, but please don't let them take care of people. You're more positive on this. I'm more skeptical on this, but I think what unites is that there is also A for effort for us, right? We try, and who knows, if we try enough, that some things will change. I think at the end, and I think that's my biggest hope in all this, as they say, the proof is in the pudding. So if you actually see then the companies that get rid of certain leaders and try to foster and nurture a different leadership culture, if you see them succeeding also in the market, that's going to be the strongest attractor for everybody else also to emulate them. And I think in this regard, for instance, Google has done a great service to everybody, because they take humans really seriously, the human side. Whether it's the hiring process, the onboarding process, the decision-making process, how they promote people within their company. And you just see the success of Google. So if Google says, this and this is important, suddenly a lot more people listen than if academics say it for a long time. So if we work hand in hand, I think we can produce these success stories that ultimately will move the world into that direction. And coming back to our previous conversation about the world leaders, maybe it's also populations that start to realize, once they compare the different countries, that certain countries are a little bit better governed and more successful. They may not be as flamboyant in their entrance on the international stage, but the people are happy and safe and healthy and don't fear crises like this as much because they have welfare states, for instance. So if enough people see these success stories, they may also vote differently the next time.
Thinking about organizations, I mean, one of the other things we're seeing is kind of in the same way that we get managers who sort of, different sides, we got companies responding differently to the demand. So we had a lot of examples, and we've got companies that willingly do this, who will, change their production, do the right thing, and really try look after their staff, try and do the best possible. You've got others who sort of, will do everything they can to stay open for as long as possible, use economic arguments to justify decision-making, or use the law to justify their decision-making. But we can all see they're just basically passengers in this. They're not taking a stand. Do you think we're going to have a different perspective on kind of business models and the people that we engage with in terms of how they've responded during this crisis?
I think so, but as with a lot of these effects, it's going to be short-lived. We do also, so this comes from marketing research. They investigate these events, whether it's corporate social responsibility or some other type of event where companies have stepped up to the plate. It positively impacts their reputation, which is good for consumer brand and also employer brand. But the effect is not often sustainable, and then people still go for a different product because it's maybe cheaper. I mean, look at Volkswagen, for instance, one of the biggest scandals that we had in the German industry. And yet, even after the scandal, they had record year after record year because people kept buying their cars. Everybody was saying, that this is going to be disastrous, but it wasn't for them. So again, knowing human nature, I know how fallible we are, and that this are often not the most important factors leading our decisions sustainably. Maybe something else, something you touched upon before, where you said, that we start realizing who are actually the people or companies or businesses that are relevant in our world. Yeah, I agree. And I also posted on this something else online. If you think that, and if you think, for instance, the garbage people or the cashiers in the supermarket or anybody that keeps a vital service open to you right now, if you think they should be more valued, and if you're one of those protesters on Facebook that signs petitions, they should get more salary and so on, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Why don't you tip the cashier at the supermarket? It's the easiest thing to do. You've got your wallet out there.
Oh, that's interesting.
You often get a change. Yeah, so give it to them. And I've done this. Now I do it on a repeated basis because now I realize how important they are. It's the easiest thing to do in the world, and yet people don't do it because habitually we still gravitate towards we tip there, we don't tip there. So we need to make certain changes in our head, and that's hard to do.
But that's really interesting, right? Because even in the US, right, the epicenter of tipping culture, in my opinion.
Yeah.
People wouldn't, they'll do it in restaurants, they'll do it, whatever. They wouldn't dream, it would be weird to do it there. So that's a really interesting kind of, I was going to say, sort of thought exercise, but actually it's practical piece to do. I mean, so what reaction do you get when you do that? Is it always this? Are you doing it just in the same shops, or is it? What happens when you go to a shop where you've never been to before?
This is actually all shops I've never been to before. So people that I've never seen before, because currently we live somewhere else. Disbelief. That's the first reaction. So they look at me in shock. They first they don't understand. They often think I want change. Make this $5 into
right.
little coins or something, and then I tell them no, it's tip. For doing your service, and it's disbelief, and then it's a short thank you. I mean, they also have the next customer in line in the supermarket. So it's nice to see the disbelief, and yet it's also nice to see that they got the message. It's appreciation, right? It's not me clapping at 9:00 from my balcony. It's not me signing some stupid Facebook petition. It's actually me saying, I see you and I care. Therefore, here in the most convenient of times, I can spare these extra euros, which otherwise I would be spending in restaurants and stuff anyway. So I'm not going broke over it. What was also interesting the last time I've done this is I try to do this visibly because I want to set norms for other people.
Right, I love
this. And so people in the line, they also looked in disbelief because I would then have this exchange with a cashier, and you see the smile on the face of the people behind you. I don't stay around to check what they do, right? but I hope that if they see this and they remember it, they will maybe tell it at home, and maybe the next time they go shopping, maybe not in that instance because that's too overwhelming to change your behavior then, that every now and then they tip somebody that is essential for them right now. And I think if we do that, I think that's, for me, community. It's not waiting for the government to do something and fix something, but you yourself compensating for it. And weirdly enough, that should be at the core of the idea of the US, right? Not waiting for the government to fix it for you with some subsidies or paychecks to those people. But my friends in the US, and I love them dearly for that, they have this absolute belief in personal mastery. I fix the things. The government is just there for, somewhere in the background, even if they're a Democrat. And so for them, it would be the easiest to just establish this as community norms. This is what we do as Americans. We look out for each other and we tip each other. because it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. I mean, imagine sitting at a cashier desk right now, touching all these items, being face to face, even if there is a plexiglass wall in between. Or as a nurse, I mean, you see and hear so many heartbreaking stories of nurses in New York City. How hard it is to even go shopping because you have your extended shifts, and everything is more expensive because you can't go to the big supermarkets. You have to somewhere run into a small kiosk on the way home. So instead of just talking the big game and blaming the politicians, just do it yourself. If you see a nurse, if you've been treated well, do it. Probably what the nurse is going to do is she's not going to take it herself. She's going to put it into some coffee box for all of them. But if that coffee box is nicely filled, and at least they have really nice coffee to go with, and sandwiches maybe at work, or they can afford fruit at work so that they can also take home, mission accomplished. It's not going to go on forever, but those for 2-3 months, I think that's the least we can do.
I love that. That's really interesting. And I think you make an incredibly powerful point around the US, because as you say, doing it in Germany is slightly strange and abnormal in that context as it would be in the UK. But you're right there. That's even easier. And I don't know why no one's thought of this. So we should trademark this somehow with your name on it, because I think it's got huge potential. But I think it's a lovely, maybe that is something that we can take away from this time and a longer term lesson around those things in terms of our individual ability to affect change. Because that's the other thing I sort of see, whether it's in an organization or whether it's in society, people at the moment feel a bit powerless. And giving them some sense of autonomy and being able to demonstrate your values. Because if we're stuck in our houses, it's actually very difficult to do anything particularly positive societally.
Yeah, yes and no. I think so. You're absolutely right. And so it would be nice to think about it. What it requires, though, is individual creativity, because we're now stuck in a different situation. So the solutions that we had before and the habits that we have and develop, they don't work anymore. The person is a habit being. Humans are habit beings. We're strongly driven by habits. Now, this situation has a lot of opportunity on a societal level, but also on an individual or professional level. But in order to lift that, you have to think a little bit outside of the box, not hugely outside of the box, just a little bit outside of the box. And that is why narratives are so important. So, for instance, how do you construe the time that you now spend at home? Is that lost time that you somehow need to fill in order not to be bored? Or is that gain time? Is that time is one of the scarcest resources for people anyway. So you're now some of us are given more time because they can't work or can't work as much. So if that is a present to you, if that's a gift, what are you going to do with that? And suddenly you change from Netflix to, man, I always wanted to learn how to play the guitar, or I always wanted to learn how to program Python or something like that. And there are a gazillion offerings right now online, even by the most prestigious universities. Many of them are for free. So what better time than to up your skills right now? And you come out of this crisis, not weaker and fatter, but actually, more resilient, and you propped yourself up because you learned new things. The nice thing is not only that it keeps you busy, but you're learning stuff. You are getting better and are more employable afterwards, because there's going to be a time where employability is going to be an issue after this crisis. So the more you can do for yourself right now is also good. So I think it's always about, at the core is, we need, as with any type of agile thinking, also in corporations, it's a different way of thinking. And now we're being thrust into a situation where our habits don't work. And now this agile or creative thinking, now it can really pay off. And I think the leaders that plug into that also in their rhetoric, they can lift a lot of potential. So I was doing an interview with some others, including leaders, and they said, well, what am I going to do with all those people that actually can't do a home office? I actually have blue collar workers and they need to stay home. There is no way they can do anything from home. And so I asked them, well, is everything all right in your organization, your operations? Are they all going perfectly? And they're like, hell no, this was never good. We have so many problems. I'm like, okay, so who are the people that actually know what are the problems? So then it dawned on them that right now they have a lot of idle capacity sitting at home that know a lot of the stuff that actually is not working. And now it dawned on them, if they use this time, they could actually now thoroughly think through improvement systems, what they can do, and develop a whole blueprint that once this crisis is over and they can go back to business, they can just roll out the blueprint. Because that's usually, you don't have the time to do this and you don't have the resources to involve all stakeholders. But if you reconstruct the situation as giving you that opportunity, then suddenly you can come out of this a little bit stronger than you went into it.
That's really interesting. So in effect, you're saying, I don't know if it's a factory, right? You've frozen production because you can't have your people there. So you can, so in effect, treat that as you've frozen time in a way, and you can use that as an opportunity to re-engineer processes. That's a fascinating perspective.
Well, it's the same for freelancers. I mean, for you or other people that are operating in their own business. I mean, the first thing you do is put your papers in order, because that's usually the thing that has been laying around. And so you need to do some filing, but that will only last you for that long, right? That's the first week, and then everything is tidied up. So then that's the next thing then is, and for anybody who's self-employed, and especially smaller businesses, there are things that they always wanted to do but never got around to it. Like really asking themselves, where do I want to develop my business? What type of marketing can I actually do? Have I ever gotten into this Google AdWords thing? How does this work? Or, there are facilitators that said, I always wanted to do a little bit of digital facilitation. Now is my time to actually learn it, because once I need it, it's going to be too late. I don't have the time to learn. So now I can learn with other facilitators how to do whiteboarding online, how to do whatever, mood charts online. So I see this now, and this is where I'm hopeful. I see this now popping up everywhere around me, that people from the first depression and the stings being at home, people start to realize, man, there are good things possible right now. I could cook, I can spend my time with the family, I can maybe go jogging, but also professionally, I can develop in ways that I haven't developed before. And this is a time I've been gifted.
And that plays into something that's been infuriating me, and you'll have seen more of this than I have because you're probably looking out for it. But, the sort of thing on LinkedIn where you get advice for working from home, right? And you get stuff like get up in the morning. And I kind of look at that and go, I understand, I get the point, right? You don't want people sitting like students in bed all day but actually, I sort of take a slightly different view on it and go, yeah, okay, maybe you need to get up and have a shower in the morning. If you've got kids, that's a different game, right? But if you haven't, then maybe you shouldn't have a shower in the morning, right? Maybe this is a time to experiment and see whether you work better at other times of the day and try new routines.
You were going to say that's a time to experiment for how long you could go without a shower.
No, I would. That's just for the avoidance of doubt. This is not a time to be experimenting with hygiene. Right, that's just not. It's not a good idea. Experiment with haircuts and that sort of thing. That's fine, right? But that's not. Let's not get creative around our hygiene routines. Right? That I would argue there is an example of follow very specific instructions and wash your hands and be clean.
Well, and other parts of your body as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Feel free to experiment with haircuts and have fun with that stuff. Right. But I think there's something interesting about the patterns, and a lot of the advice that seems to be out there is it's literally just you need to replicate the routines that you had in the physical office at home. And so you should get up in the morning. And I kind of go, if you're working in a call center maybe and you've had to come home and you're covering a shift, then it's very important that you start work at a certain point in time and you cover that shift. But if you're somebody that's in a role that's a bit more, a bit more flexible, a bit more knowledge economy, then actually this is an opportunity to try different things out. And providing your home environment can tolerate it, is try working in a different room, try working different hours, try different methods of production, try different. To your point, right? So just sort of stress test new things and try it out in a relatively safe environment, because I think at the moment there's a huge amount of forgiveness out there. So if you don't know what you're doing with Zoom or with something else, people go, oh, that's okay, right? And we laugh about it. I think in 6 months' time, it'll be seen as unprofessional if you don't know how to operate video conference facility. But now you can get away with all these things. So I think there's this opportunity to take advantage of what is a collective sense of forgiveness for mistakes. And kind of try some new things. I
completely agree. So experiment around. Actually, we do have this notion in organizations that's called A/B testing, right? So you become an experimenter on your own life. You check for yourself what works best. And not a lot of people work best 9 to 5. You have I'm not sure what the English word is, circadian rhythm, so a biorhythm that you have. You need to figure out when you work best on what task. And the great thing is now you have the freedom to do so. And, whether working outside or inside, whether you need to be in an office and have or home office, have no noise, or whether you need like a slight level of noise around you. So this is great to experiment around. Having said that, I would still say, a certain online advice is not too bad, because too many people also just think they can wing it. And once we start winging things, they usually go sideways. So getting up in the morning is a good idea. Having your alarm clock set, showering is a good idea. Making your bed, dressing properly is a good idea. And why am I saying this? Again, the human is a habitual being. We like our habits. So what you want right now for your time at home is to establish a structure that works for you, and then keep with that structure. Because once you have that structure going, it eliminates a lot of cognitive load. Otherwise, you have to rethink every day, how am I going to live my day? What am I going to do? By just having structures and routines, you get that cognitive load off, and that allows you to work more on the task that you actually should be working. So instead of thinking, I'll see when I get up, and so if I get up at that time, I'll do this and so on, that becomes all very complicated. Get up at a certain time. Maybe your structure is, I'll get up when I wake up, and then I'm going to do this and this. But I would still say, if that's your routine, then stick to that routine and develop a habit that you can be productive. And then give yourself, this is the odd thing about humans, we respond to cues. So it's almost like an automatic process in us. Sometimes we see certain things, and then we know automatically that the next behavior is going to be this, or the next sequence in the events is going to be this. It's almost like driving, when to do what. And once you've done that, the automatic next behavior is this. So we function like this in our normal lives as well. We do certain things, and then we come to expect the next thing, which makes our lives a lot easier, because then one thing ties into the next. So try to build these little signal cues for yourself. For instance, if you have in the morning, you'd have a mug of coffee, and once you put it in the sink, that's your signal to go off to your laptop. And so once you do this 10 times in a row, you don't think about it anymore. It's your routine in the morning. We need to, you said, well, some of it is just replicating what's in the office, but part of that makes sense. For instance, you can leave your house in the morning, you shut the door, and then your private life is gone, and you go to work. Now, we cannot do the same thing now in the home office, but we need to think about ways how we can give ourselves those signals that now is work time. Because if we don't have a clear work time for us, many of us cannot concentrate. So this could be closing the door to your office if you have enough space at home that you have an office. Or it could be, like the mug that you put somewhere, or some of also nice things you can put on like a sweater, your work sweater. And then that's your work sweater you put on in the morning. It doesn't need to be a jacket or anything, but a work sweater. And the nice thing is you can pull it off in the evening. And the symbol sends a cue to you. This is done. It's psychologically puts it into a different sphere. It's a cupboard. You can leave it there and then put it on the next morning. So these little tricks, they actually help a little bit. But I agree, we don't need to pretend like we're in a regular office, only that regular office is at home. And that would also be stupid, because we would forego all the opportunities right now to actually try out home office.
Love it. That is an amazing note on which to finish. So listen, thank you so much, firstly, for being on the podcast. Secondly, and I'll put links to this in the show notes, thank you for your social media efforts, because you're covering a number of different networks. So you're on Instagram, which I think from an academic perspective is quite a rarity, and I love the stuff you put there. Your LinkedIn and Twitter contributions also highly worth reading. So I'll put links to all of those so people can connect with you. But thank you for providing brain food and inspiration at a time that it's very much needed. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Only a pleasure.
So that's it for another episode of the podcast. My massive thanks to Niels for being such a great guest and for his fantastic insights and ideas. I highly recommend following him on Twitter and Instagram, and I've put details of how you can do that in the show notes. If you're not already subscribed to the Human Risk podcast, you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. If you have time, please also leave a review for the show on the platform you use. It raises the profile, helps others to find it, and means I can continue to get high quality guests onto the show. I'll be back with another episode very soon. But in the meantime, please stay safe and remember to be kind to each other. Thank you so much for listening.